Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. Elijah Grant stood on the balcony of his penthouse in Pioneer Square, Seattle, the city's lights sprawling below like a canvas of stars trapped in glass. The air carried the faint scent of rain and roasted coffee from the shop across the street, but none of it touched him. At 35, he was the tech prodigy who'd turned a garage startup into Grant Technologies, a billion-dollar empire revolutionizing medical software. Forbes had crowned him twice, the business papers called him a visionary, and yet every morning he woke up in this sleek, soulless apartment and felt nothing. His engagement to Sophia Winters, the elegant heiress from San Francisco's old money, was the next logical step. A merger of power, not passion. Their wedding, 6 months away, would seal deals and open doors, but when he pictured it all, he saw was another contract signed. Tonight, though something shifted, he was hosting his annual Bright Futures charity gala, a parade of Seattle's elite writing checks to feel good about their wealth. The venue. A converted warehouse turned art gallery in Pioneer Square, buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses and the low hum of a saxophone weaving through the crowd. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over abstract paintings and tailored suits, the air thick with perfume and ambition. Elijah adjusted his tie, scanned the room, and braced for another night of shaking hands and faking smiles. That's when he saw her. Across the gallery, near a display of cutting-edge medical equipment, his foundation had funded, stood a woman who didn't belong. Not because she wasn't stunning. She was in a deep emerald dress that hugged her curves, her natural curls swept loosely over one shoulder, but because she wasn't performing, while everyone else networked or posed for photos, she leaned forward, studying a spec sheet on an MRI scanner, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elijah's feet moved before his brain caught up, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. "Enjoying the party?" he asked, offering her a glass of champagne from a passing tray. His voice, usually polished for investors, came out softer, curious. She looked up, and those deep brown eyes hit him like a shockwave. Intelligence sparked in them, sharp enough to cut through the room's pretense. "Nah," she said, her Chicago accent slipping through warm and unapologetic. "I'm here for the gear. Your foundation picked the wrong MRI scanner, by the way. The Siemens models got better resolution for neural imaging." Elijah blinked, then laughed, a real laugh, not the rehearsed chuckle he used for boardrooms. "You're schooling me on my own equipment. Somebody's gotta—" She shot back a half smile, tugging at her lips. "Jasmine Nkrumah. I'm with the neuro research team. Your money's keeping afloat?" "Elijah Grant," he said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm against his, and for a moment the noise of the gala faded. Saxophone chatter, all of it. The chandelier's light caught the curve of her cheek, painting her skin in shades of gold. His pulse kicked up a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. They fell into conversation like they'd known each other forever. Jasmine talked about her work on Alzheimer's, her voice lighting up as she described breakthroughs that could save minds. She didn't care about stock prices or who was who in the room, and when Elijah mentioned his company, she just nodded, unimpressed. "Cool. But what's your take on neural pathways?" she asked, leaning closer, her eyes daring him to keep up. He did. For hours they bounced between science and stories, her growing up in Chicago's Auburn Gresham, sneaking cornbread from her grandma's kitchen. Him admitting he'd wanted to be a high school teacher before tech swallowed him whole. "You a teacher?" Jasmine teased her laugh, low and rich, like a note from the saxophone across the room. "Bet you'd be the kind who'd sneak kids extra credit just for trying." "Guilty," Elijah said, grinning. "What about you? Bet you were the kid correcting the teacher." "Oh, every damn day," she admitted, and they both laughed, the sound blending with the music. The air between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. When Elijah handed her a glass of water, She'd waved off the champagne again, their fingers brushed. Her skin was soft, warm, and the contact sent a jolt through him like touching a live wire. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the world shrank to just them. Her gaze steady, his breath catching the golden light, bathing her face. The saxophone's slow, sultry notes curled around them, and Elijah swore he could hear his own heartbeat, loud as a drum. He wanted to step closer to let his hand linger, but she pulled back just enough to break the spell, her smile turning playful. "Careful, Mr. Billionaire," she said, voice low. "I'm not here to be charmed." Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through Elijah. "Darling, there you are." Sophia glided over her blonde hair, flawless, her diamond necklace catching the light. She slipped a hand onto his arm, her touch practiced territorial. "They're waiting for your speech." Jasmine stepped back, her expression polite but unreadable. "Nice meeting you, Elijah," she said, pressing a business card into his hand. "If you ever want to talk scanners, you know where to find me." She turned her dress swaying as she melted into the crowd, leaving a faint trace of her jasmine-scented perfume in the air. Elijah's fingers closed around the card, his skin still tingling where hers had been. Sophia's hand tightened on his arm, her smile perfect, but her eyes sharp. "Who was that?" she asked, voice light as a blade. "Just a researcher," he said the lie, tasting bitter. His gaze followed Jasmine until she disappeared, and something deep inside him shifted like a crack in a dam. "Speech time," Sophia said, steering him toward the stage. He went through the motions. Thanked the donors, pitched the cause, smiled for the cameras, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Jasmine's laugh, her fearless honesty, the way her eyes had seen right through him. For the first time in years, he felt awake, alive, and terrified of what that meant. As the gala wound down, Elijah slipped away to a quiet corner, pulling out Jasmine's card. Her name stared back at him in crisp black letters. Dr. Jasmine Nkrumah, Neuroscience Research, Chicago. He told himself he'd call her about the foundation, maybe discuss those MRI scanners. But deep down he knew it was more than that. He'd spent his life checking boxes, degrees, deals, an engagement that looked perfect on paper, but tonight one conversation had blown it all apart. "Hey, boss, you good?" Talia Brooks, his assistant and the closest thing he had to a friend, leaned against the wall, her braids swinging as she tilted her head. "You've been staring at that card like it's a winning lottery ticket." Elijah chuckled, pocketing the card. "Just thinking." "Uh-huh," Talia said, smirking. "That researcher got you shook, didn't she?" "Shook." He raised an eyebrow, but his grin gave him away. "Go home, Talia." She laughed, heading for the exit, but her words lingered. Shook was right. Jasmine Nkrumah wasn't just a researcher, she was a spark, and Elijah wasn't sure he could outrun the fire she'd started. Back on the balcony, he looked out at the city again, the lights blurring into a haze. Sophia was waiting inside, planning their future venues, guest lists, mergers disguised as love. But for the first time, Elijah wondered what it would be like to tear it all down, to chase something real. He pulled out Jasmine's card again, tracing her name with his thumb. Tomorrow he'd call her. For work, he told himself. For answers, his heart whispered. One look, one night. One woman who saw him, not his billions. Sometimes fate crashes into your perfectly planned life, and you have to decide. Play it safe, or risk everything for a chance at something real. What would you do if you met the one person who made you question it all? Hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Let me know about a moment that changed your life forever. Elijah. Grant stepped off the private jet onto the tarmac at O'Hare, the Chicago wind cutting through his tailored coat like it had a personal grudge. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, all steel and glass. But it was the pulse of the streets that hit him first. honking cabs, the faint thump of bass from a passing car, the smell of grilled onions from a hot dog stand nearby. He'd been to Chicago for board meetings, always in the sterile loop, but today was different. Today, he was heading to Auburn Gresham, a South Side neighborhood he'd never set foot in, to visit Jasmine Nkrumah's research institute. The business card in his pocket felt heavier than it should. Her name burned into his mind since that night in Seattle 2 weeks ago. He told himself this was about the foundation Grant Technologies funded medical innovation. So checking out Jasmine's work on Alzheimer's was just due diligence. But as his driver navigated through the city, past murals splashed with color and corner stores buzzing with life, Elijah's pulse quickened. He could still see her under the gala's golden lights, emerald dress, sharp eyes that laugh, that felt like a secret just for him. He hadn't called her about MRI scanners like he'd planned. Instead, he'd emailed about a potential partnership, and now here he was, chasing a feeling he couldn't name. The institute sat on a busy street in Auburn Gresham, a modest brick building wedged between a barber shop and a soul food joint. Its sign weathered but proud, Southside Neurological Research Center. The air smelled of fried chicken and sweet cornbread, and a blues riff drifted from a nearby bar, raw and soulful. Elijah stepped inside his polished shoes out of place on the scuffed linoleum, and there she was, Jasmine in a white lab coat, her curls pulled back, scribbling notes at a cluttered desk. She looked up, and those eyes hit him again, sharp and warm, like she could see straight through his billion-dollar facade. "Mr. Billionaire," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Didn't expect you to show up in person. Thought you'd send some assistant with a clipboard. Figured I'd see where my money's going." Elijah shot back, grinning. "Plus, I owe you a lesson on why my MRI scanner's the right call." Jasmine laughed low and rich, and stood gesturing for him to follow. "Come on then, let's see if you can keep up." She led him through the lab, a maze of humming machines and whiteboards covered in equations. Her passion lit up the room as she explained her team's work mapping neural pathways to slow Alzheimer's, a disease that had stolen her grandmother's memories. Elijah listened, hanging on her every word, not just because the science was groundbreaking, but because of her, the way her hands danced when she talked, the fire in her voice, the way she made complex ideas sound like poetry. He'd sat through countless pitches, but none had ever pulled him in like this. They ended up in a small testing room where a prototype brain scanner glowed under fluorescent lights. Jasmine pointed to a screen, her sleeve brushing his arm as she leaned in. "This is where we're decoding memory patterns," she said. "If we crack this, we could catch Alzheimer's before it takes hold." Elijah nodded, but his focus slipped to the curve of her neck, the way her lab coat couldn't hide her shape. He caught himself clearing his throat. "That's incredible." "You're incredible," she raised an eyebrow, half smirking. "Easy, Grant. Save the charm for your gala crowd." He chuckled, but the air between them shifted warmer, heavier. They moved to a nearby diner for lunch, a hole in the wall called Mama's Kitchen, where the smell of collard greens and macaroni and cheese wrapped around them like a hug. Red vinyl booths squeaked as they slid in, and a jukebox in the corner played a slow blues tune, the singer's voice raw with longing. Jasmine ordered for them fried chicken, greens, cornbread, and laughed when Elijah fumbled with his fork trying to tackle the greens. "Man, you're butchering those," she said, leaning across the table to show him how to scoop them right. Her hand grazed his, and the touch sent a spark up his arm, her skin soft and warm. The diner's neon sign buzzed outside, casting a pink glow through the window, painting her face in soft hues. Elijah's breath hitched, and for a moment he forgot the food, the lab, everything but her. "You're enjoying this way too much," he said, voice low, trying to play it cool. "Gotta school you sometime," she replied, her smile teasing, but her eyes holding his, deep and searching. The blues song swelled its guitar notes curling around them, and Elijah felt like they were the only two people in the world. The moment broke when a woman in a sharp blazer strode into the diner, her heels clicking like a warning. Camille Dubois, a Miami investor, and Sophia's best friend, had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elijah Grant. What a surprise, she said, sliding into the booth uninvited. Didn't know you made house calls, too. This part of town. Elijah's jaw tightened. Camille, just checking on a grantee. Mm-hmm. Camille said, her gaze flicking to Jasmine, sizing her up. Sophia mentioned you've been distracted lately. Wedding plans keeping you busy. Jasmine's expression stayed neutral, but her posture stiffened. We're discussing research, she said. Voice cool. You interested in Alzheimer's studies? Ms. Dubois? Camille supplied her tone syrupy. And no, darling. I'm more into investments, like ensuring Elijah's priorities stay aligned. She stood, smoothing her blazer. Good to see you, Elijah. I'll let Sophia know you're working hard. As Camille sauntered out, the diner's warmth felt colder. Jasmine pushed her plate away, her eyes on Elijah. Your fiancé? Know you're here. It's not like that, he said quickly, but the words felt hollow. This is professional. Right? She said, her voice flat. Let's keep it that way. The rest of the day was all business. Jasmine showed him data, introduced him to her team, but the easy banter from earlier was gone, replaced by a polite distance. Elijah hated it. Hated Camille's shadow hanging over them. Hated the ring on his finger that felt like a shackle. He wanted to explain, to tell Jasmine this wasn't just about grants, but every time he opened his mouth, her guarded eyes stopped him. That evening, Jasmine's mother, Loretta Nkrumah, insisted Elijah join them for dinner at their family home, a cozy two-story in Auburn Gresham with a front porch strung with fairy lights. The living room smelled of sage and roasted yams, and a vinyl record spun old soul tunes. Marvin Gaye's voice smooth as velvet. Loretta, a retired teacher with Jasmine's sharp eyes and a warm smile, set a table piled with jollof rice-fried plantains and chicken stew, a nod to their Ghanaian roots. Jasmine's younger cousin Trey grilled Elijah about tech, while Loretta shared stories of Jasmine as a kid, always reading medical journals under the covers. You raised a genius, Elijah said, raising a glass to Loretta. The fairy lights outside twinkled through the window, casting a soft glow over Jasmine's face as she rolled her eyes, embarrassed. She's stubborn too, Loretta said, chuckling, but her heart's always been bigger than her head. Jasmine shot her mom a look, but her smile softened, and for a moment, Elijah saw her unguarded again. After dinner, they ended up in the lab again, working late on a grant proposal. The building was quiet, just the hum of machines and the faint blues riff from a distant bar. Jasmine stood at a monitor, her lab coat off her blouse, clinging lightly to her frame. She pointed to a graph explaining neural spikes and stepped closer, her arm brushing his. Here's where we're seeing progress, she said, her voice low, focused. Her hair grazed his cheek, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and bergamot, and Elijah's heart thudded loud in the silence. The monitor's blue light bathed her skin, highlighting the curve of her jaw, and when she turned to face him, their faces were inches apart. Her breath was warm, her lips parted slightly, and the air crackled with possibility. His hand twitched, aching to touch her to close the gap, but he saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Jasmine, he started, voice rough, but she stepped back, breaking the spell. We're good here, she said, her tone firm but soft. You should head back. Big day tomorrow. Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, tomorrow. He left the lab, the Chicago night cool against his skin, but the heat of that moment lingered, her scent, her eyes, the almost kiss burning in his mind. Back at his hotel, he sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. A text from Sophia waited. Dinner tomorrow. Miss you. Guilt twisted in his gut, but it wasn't just about Sophia. It was Jasmine, her laugh, her fire, the way she made him feel like a man. Not a mogul. He'd come here for business, but he was leaving with a truth he couldn't ignore. He was falling hard, and it was going to hurt like hell. Camille's visit wasn't a coincidence. She'd report back to Sophia, and Elijah knew the clock was ticking. He opened his laptop, drafting an email to Jasmine about their partnership, but his fingers hovered over the keys. This wasn't just about grants or scanners. It was about her, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could pretend otherwise. The Atlanta skyline glittered against the dusk, its towers catching the last streaks of orange from the setting sun. Elijah Grant leaned against the railing of his hotel balcony in Midtown, the city's pulse humming below car horns. Laughter, the faint wail of a saxophone from a soul club down the street. The air smelled of magnolias and grilled peaches, a sweet southern warmth that felt worlds away from Seattle's crisp rain or Chicago's gritty edge. He was here for the International Medical Technology Conference, a 3-day marathon of panels and pitches. But his mind wasn't on the keynote he was supposed to deliver tomorrow. It was on Jasmine Nkrumah, who'd be presenting her Alzheimer's research at the same event. Since Chicago 2 months ago, their weekly video calls about their research partnership had become the highlight of his days, her voice and laugh sneaking into his thoughts like a song he couldn't shake. Elijah adjusted his tie, glancing at his phone. A text from Sophia glowed on the screen. "Good luck with your speech. Call me after," guilt twisted in his chest. He hadn't told her about the late-night calls with Jasmine, the way he'd started scheduling his life around them, or the way that diner lunch in Chicago replayed in his mind. The buzz of neon, the brush of Jasmine's hand, the almost kiss in the lab that still burned. He typed a quick "will do" and pocketed the phone, but the weight of the engagement ring in his pocket felt heavier every day. The conference center in Midtown was a sleek glass fortress buzzing with doctors, tech moguls, and researchers. Inside, chandeliers cast a cool white glow, and the hum of conversation mixed with the clink of coffee cups. Elijah spotted Jasmine across the main hall, standing by a digital poster of her research, her navy blazer sharp, but her smile warm as she answered questions from a small crowd. Her curls were loose, catching the light, and when her eyes met his, she gave a small wave, like they were old friends. His heart did a stupid flip, and he crossed the room before he could overthink it. "Dr. Nkrumah," he said, grinning, ready to wow the room. "Only if you don't steal my thunder, Mr. Billionaire." She shot back her Chicago accent, wrapping around the words like a tease. "Heard your keynotes, the big draw. Nah, they're all here for you," he said, and meant it. Her presentation was the talk of the conference, a potential game-changer for early Alzheimer's detection, and Elijah felt a surge of pride he had no right to claim. Her session was packed, standing room only. Jasmine took the stage with a quiet confidence, her voice steady as she walked through slides of neural data, her passion turning complex science into something almost poetic. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Elijah found himself clapping hardest, his chest tight with admiration. She caught his eye from the stage, a quick smile flashing just for him, and it hit him like a freight train. He wasn't just impressed. He was falling hard, and there was no going back. Afterward, he found her in the lobby, surrounded by researchers, but looking a little overwhelmed. "You need a break," he said, leaning in so she could hear over the crowd. "Dinner. Somewhere that's not a conference buffet." Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. "Only if you're buying Grant." They ended up at a tiny tapas bar in Midtown, tucked away from the conference chaos. The place was all warm wood and candlelight, with a soul playlist humming low. Al Green's voice, smooth as honey. They shared plates of fried green tomatoes and shrimp croquettes, washing it down with red sangria that left a sweet tang on their tongues. The conversation flowed easy like it always did with her. She talked about growing up in Chicago, how her grandma's Alzheimer's had pushed her into neuroscience, her voice cracking when she mentioned the day her grandma forgot her name. Elijah opened up too, more than he meant to, about his cold-driven father, about how building his company had become his only measure of worth. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Jasmine asked, swirling her glass, her eyes searching his. "Every damn day," he admitted, his voice low. "Until I met you." Her breath caught, and the air between them shifted heavy with unspoken truth. The candle on the table flickered, casting shadows across her face, highlighting the curve of her lips. Elijah's hand twitched on the table, inches from hers, and he wanted nothing more than to close that distance to feel her skin again. But she looked away, sipping her sangria, and the moment passed. "Let's walk," she said, standing. "I need air." They stepped into the Atlanta night, the city alive with light and sound. Midtown streets were a mix of sleek bars and old brick buildings, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine vines climbing the walls. They wandered toward Piedmont Park, the skyline glowing behind them, and talked about everything and nothing. Her love for spicy plantains, his secret obsession with old jazz records. The park was quiet, the lake reflecting the city's lights like a mirror, and for a moment it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Then the sky opened up. Rain poured down, sudden and relentless, soaking them in seconds. Jasmine laughed, grabbing Elijah's hand as they ran for cover, their shoes splashing through puddles. They ducked under a massive oak tree, its branches shielding them just enough. Jasmine's blouse clung to her, outlining every curve, her curls dripping and wild. Elijah's jacket was drenched, but he didn't care. She was inches away, her breath visible in the cool air, her eyes locked on his, daring and vulnerable, all at once. "You're a mess," she teased, but her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Says the woman who looks like she just walked out of a storm scene." He shot back, stepping closer. The rain drummed on the leaves above a steady rhythm that matched his racing pulse. Her scent, jasmine and rain, filled his senses, and when she shivered, he instinctively pulled her against him, his hands on her waist, her body warm through the wet fabric. "Elijah," she murmured, her hands resting on his chest, but she didn't push him away. The city lights flickered through the rain, painting her skin in shades of gold and blue, and time seemed to stop. He leaned in, slow, giving her a chance to pull back, but she didn't. Their lips met, tentative at first, then hungry, a dam breaking after months of restraint. His hands slid into her wet curls, tangling in their softness, and her fingers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was fire and rain, raw and desperate, her breath hot against his mouth, the taste of sangria lingering on her lips. The world fell away, Rain Park, everything, until it was just them, lost in each other. But reality crashed back. Jasmine pulled away, her chest, heaving, her eyes wide with regret and resolve. "We can't," she said, voice breaking. "You're engaged, Elijah." "I'm not that woman." "Jasmine, wait." He started, but she stepped out from under the tree, rain streaking down her face. "Figure out what you want," she said, her words cutting through the storm. "But don't drag me into your mess." She turned and walked away, her silhouette fading into the rain, leaving Elijah standing there soaked and gutted. His lips still burned from her kiss, his hands aching to pull her back. But she was right. He was a mess, and he was dragging her down with him. As he trudged back to his hotel, the rain cold against his skin, he didn't notice the figure watching from across the street. Camille Dubois, her phone in hand, had snapped a photo of the kiss, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. She'd been trailing Elijah since Chicago, waiting for a slip, and now she had it. Sophia would hear about this, and Camille would make sure it hurt. Back in his room, Elijah stripped off his wet clothes, the memory of Jasmine's kiss looping in his mind, her warmth, her taste, the way she'd fit against him like she belonged there. But her words echoed louder. "Figure out what you want." He sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, the rain tapping the window like a countdown. His phone buzzed, another text from Sophia. How was the conference? He couldn't bring himself to answer. Then another message came through, this one from Malik Turner, Jasmine's friend who'd been at the conference for a surgical panel. "Saw you with Jazz tonight. Don't play her, man. She deserves better." Elijah's stomach dropped. Malik had seen them too. The walls were closing in and he was running out of time to lie to himself. He thought of Jasmine, her fire, her heart, the way she'd challenged him to be more than a billionaire in a suit. He thought of Sophia, elegant and trapped in the same gilded cage he was, and he thought of the life he'd built. Penthouse private jets, a wedding that was more merger than love. For the first time, he let himself imagine tearing it all down. Consequences be damned. But wanting something and having the guts to chase it were two different things, and Elijah wasn't sure he was brave enough yet. Elijah Grant stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Seattle penthouse, the city's lights blurring into a cold, distant haze. Rain streaked the glass, a steady patter that echoed the storm in his head. It had been 3 days since Atlanta, since that kiss with Jasmine Nkrumah under the rain-soaked oak tree, her lips hot against his, her curls tangled in his fingers, the world falling away until she'd pulled back and walked away. Her words still cut. "Figure out what you want." He hadn't slept right since her scent, jasmine and rain lingering like a ghost. His phone sat silent on the counter. No word from her but a dozen missed calls from Sophia Winters and a cryptic text from Camille Dubois. "We need to talk. Now." The Pioneer Square penthouse with its sleek marble counters and minimalist furniture had never felt like home. But tonight, it was a cage. Elijah's engagement ring to Sophia sat in a velvet box on the coffee table, glinting under the chandelier, like an accusation. He'd spent years building a life that looked perfect. Billion-dollar company. Forbes covers a fiancée who checked every box. But that kiss had cracked it all open. Jasmine wasn't just a spark. She was a wrecking ball, and Elijah wasn't sure he wanted to rebuild the same walls. A knock at the door snapped him out of it. Talia Brooks. His assistant and unofficial confidant stood there, her braids pulled back, her expression a mix of worry and exasperation. "You look like hell, boss," she said, stepping inside her sneakers, squeaking on the hardwood. "What's going on? You've been ghosting everyone since Atlanta." Elijah rubbed his jaw, the stubble rough under his fingers. "It's complicated." "Uh-huh," Talia said, dropping onto the leather couch. "Spill it. This about that researcher, Jasmine." He froze, then sighed, sinking into an armchair. "How'd you know?" "Man, you've been different since that gala," she said, smirking. "And after Chicago you were practically glowing. Then you come back from Atlanta looking like you got hit by a truck. Connect the dots." Elijah let out a dry laugh, but it faded fast. He told her everything, the talks with Jasmine, the diner in Chicago, the kiss in Atlanta, the way it had felt like waking up after years underwater. "She told me to figure out what I want," he said, voice low. "But I'm engaged, Talia, to Sophia, and I don't even know who I am without all this." He gestured at the penthouse, the city, the life he'd built. Talia leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You're more than your bank account, Elijah. But you gotta be honest with Sophia, with yourself. You can't keep playing both sides." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Camille's name flashed and Elijah's stomach sank. He answered, bracing himself. "What's up?" "Camille, meet me at the Harbor Club," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. Sophia's here. We have a problem, and it's got your name all over it. Elijah's grip tightened on the phone. He knew what this was about. Camille had been in Atlanta lurking like a shark, and that photo of him and Jasmine was her ammunition. "I'll be there in 20, he said, hanging up. He looked at Talia, who raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," he admitted, grabbing his coat. "But I'm done running." The Harbor Club, a high-end restaurant in Pioneer Square, was all dark wood and soft jazz, the kind of place where Seattle's elite closed deals over $200 steaks. Sophia sat at a corner table, her blonde hair flawless, her navy dress hugging her frame. Camille was beside her sipping a martini, her eyes glinting with triumph. Elijah's heart pounded as he approached the weight of the moment, pressing down like gravity. "Elijah," Sophia said, her voice calm but icy, her blue eyes locking onto his. "Sit." He did the leather chair creaking under him. The jazz piano in the background felt mocking, its notes too light for the tension at the table. Camille slid her phone across a photo glowing on the screen. Elijah and Jasmine in Atlanta locked in that rain-soaked kiss, her hands on his chest, his in her hair. The image hit like a punch, every detail vivid, her wet blouse, the city lights, the raw need in their embrace. "Care to explain?" Sophia asked, her composure, a steel trap. Elijah's mouth went dry. He'd rehearsed lies on the drive over. It was nothing a mistake, but looking at Sophia, he couldn't do it. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." Sophia's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed steady. "We had an arrangement. Elijah, not a love story, but a partnership. I expected loyalty, not headlines." Camille leaned in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This could tank your stock, darling, and Sophia's family isn't thrilled about public humiliation." Elijah ignored her, focusing on Sophia. "You deserve better than this," he said. "Better than me playing a role. I don't love you, Sophia. Not the way you should be loved, and I can't keep pretending." The words hung heavy, the jazz piano fading to a soft hum. Sophia's face didn't crack, but something flickered in her eyes. Hurt, maybe, or relief. "You found someone else," she said. Not a question. "I found myself," he corrected, surprising even himself. "And I can't live a lie anymore." Sophia studied him, then nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then we're done," she said, standing her movements graceful, even in defeat. "Good luck, Elijah. You'll need it." She walked out, Camille trailing her like a shadow, throwing Elijah a venomous look. The restaurant felt smaller, the air thinner. Elijah sat there, the photos still glowing on Camille's phone, a reminder of what he'd just blown up. His engagement was over, his carefully curated life in pieces, and he hadn't even told Jasmine. Part of him wanted to call her to say he was free, but her words in Atlanta stopped him. "Don't drag me into your mess." She deserved more than a man still figuring himself out. The next morning, the fallout hit. Tabloids splashed the story. Tech tycoon dumps heiress for mystery woman with grainy versions of Camille's photo. Grant Technologies stock dipped, and Elijah's phone exploded with calls from investors, reporters, and his father, David Grant. He met David at the family estate in Tacoma, a sprawling mansion that always felt more like a museum than a home. David, a silver-haired businessman with a permanent scowl, didn't mince words. "You've lost your mind," he said, pacing the oak-paneled study, a glass of scotch in hand. Sophia Winters was your ticket to the next level, her father's connections, her family's influence, and you throw it away for some researcher. "She's not just some researcher," Elijah snapped, surprising himself. "And I'm done living for your approval." David's eyes narrowed. "You're a Grant. Act like it." Elijah walked out, his father's voice echoing behind him. Back in Seattle, he threw himself into damage control board meetings, PR statements, But it wasn't enough. The media frenzy grew, and whispers about Jasmine started circling. Her name dragged into the mess, despite her silence. Guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't contacted her since Atlanta, respecting her need for space, but now he wondered if that was a mistake. Talia was his lifeline. Over beers at a dive bar in Queen Anne, she cut through his spiral. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice firm. "Sophia wasn't your future, but you gotta figure out who is, and maybe stop moping long enough to do something about it." "I don't even know where to start." Elijah admitted the bar's jukebox playing a low blues riff that reminded him of Chicago's Start With You. Talia said, "Not the billionaire, not the headlines. Just Elijah." Her words stuck. The next day, Elijah put the penthouse on the market, its sterile luxury, a reminder of a life he no longer wanted. He leased a small apartment in Queen Anne with a view of the Sound and a balcony just big enough for a chair. He started volunteering at a community hospital, helping with admin work, talking to patients who didn't care about his net worth. It was humbling, grounding, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something real. But Jasmine was never far from his mind. Late at night alone in his new place, he'd close his eyes and slip back to Atlanta. The rain drumming on the leaves, her body pressed against his, the heat of her lips, the way her breath had caught when he deepened the kiss. The memory was vivid, almost painful, her wet curls under his fingers, the city lights painting her skin in gold and blue, the taste of sangria and rain on her tongue. It wasn't just desire. It was connection, raw and unfiltered, something he'd never had with Sophia or anyone else. But she'd walked away, and he couldn't blame her. A week later, a call from Nkrumah. Jasmine's mother caught him off guard. Her voice was warm but firm over the phone. "I saw the news," she said. "You've made a big choice, Elijah. But my daughter's not a prize to be won. If you care about her, respect her enough to sort yourself out first." "I'm trying," he said, his throat tight. "I don't want to hurt her." "Then don't," Loretta said. "But don't give up either if it's real." The call ended, but her words lingered, a challenge and a lifeline. Elijah stood on his balcony, the Seattle rain soft against his face, and made a decision. He wouldn't contact Jasmine yet, not until he was someone she could trust, someone who knew what he wanted. He'd broken one cage, but building a new life, a real one, was going to take more than a kiss in the rain. For now, he'd focus on himself, even if every step felt like walking away from her. The Boston autumn painted Jamaica Plain in shades of fire, crimson maples, golden oaks, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Elijah Grant stood outside a low brick building, the South End Neurological Institute, clutching a bouquet of wild daisies so tightly his knuckles ached. 5 months had passed since he'd ended his engagement to Sophia Winters, since the tabloids had torn his life apart, since he'd last seen Jasmine Nkrumah walk away in Atlanta's rain. He'd moved to a modest apartment in Seattle's Queen Anne, sold his penthouse and started volunteering at a community hospital, piecing together who he was when the billionaire label was stripped away. But no matter how far he went, Jasmine was there in his dreams, in the blues records he played late at night, in the memory of her lips against his heart, and fleeting. He'd heard she'd taken a new job here in Boston, a step up to lead her own Alzheimer's research team. Loretta Nkrumah's call a month ago had been the push he needed. If it's real, don't give up. So here he was, in jeans and a flannel shirt. No suit, no private jet. Just a man hoping he wasn't too late. The Institute's glass doors reflected the setting sun, and Elijah's heart thudded like a drum as he stepped inside the daisies, trembling in his grip. The lobby was quiet, all polished wood and soft light, with a mural of neural pathways glowing on one wall. A receptionist eyed him curiously, probably wondering why some guy with flowers was asking for Dr. Nkrumah. "She's in her office," the woman said, buzzing him through third floor end of the hall. Elijah took the stairs, each step heavier than the last. What if she'd moved on, What if Atlanta was a mistake she'd buried? He reached her door, her name etched on a plaque. Dr. Jasmine Nkrumah, Director of Research, and knocked his throat dry. "Come in." Her voice called warm, but distracted. He opened the door, and there she was, bent over a laptop. Her curls tied loosely, a sweater slipping off one shoulder. The office smelled of coffee and books with papers stacked high and a window letting in the golden dusk. She looked up and her eyes widened, her pen clattering to the desk. "Elijah," she said, half standing, her voice a mix of shock and something softer. "What the hell are you doing here?" He held out the daisies, his smile shaky. "Making a choice," he said. "For me, and I hope for us." Jasmine stared, her expression guarded, but she didn't tell him to leave. She gestured to a chair, and he sat the daisies awkward in his lap. The room felt small, the air thick with everything unsaid. Outside, a street musician played a slow violin tune, its notes drifting through the open window, mingling with the rustle of leaves. "I saw the news," she said, leaning back, her arms crossed. "You and Sophia. That was big." "Yeah," Elijah said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Big mess, too. Stock tanked my dad, disowned me for a week, and the tabloids had a field day. But it was the right call." She raised an eyebrow, her Chicago accent sharp. "And you're here because—" "What? You think I'm the next box to check?" "No," he said, leaning forward, his voice steady. "I'm here because you woke me up, Jasmine. That night at the gala in Chicago and Atlanta, you made me see how empty my life was. I ended things with Sophia not because of you, but because I couldn't keep living a lie. I'm not the guy from the penthouse anymore. I'm just me, and I want a chance to know you properly, no complications." Her eyes searched his, and for a moment neither spoke. The violin outside swelled a haunting melody that seemed to carry their history. The gala's saxophone, Chicago's blues, Atlanta's rain. Finally, she stood walking to the window, her silhouette framed by the dusk. "You hurt me," she said quietly, not turning. "That kiss in Atlanta, it meant something, and then you let me walk away. I had to protect myself, Elijah. I'm not some fling to spice up your life." "I know," he said, standing his chest tight, "and I'm sorry I didn't reach out because I needed to fix myself first. I wasn't good enough for you then. I'm trying to be now." She turned her eyes softer, but still wary. "Trying's a start," she said, "but I don't do half measures. If we do this, it's real, or it's nothing." "Real," he said, stepping closer, the daisies forgotten on the chair. "I'm all in, Jasmine. If you'll have me." The space between them crackled, the violin's notes fading into a hush. She stepped toward him close enough that he could smell her familiar scent, jasmine and bergamot, warm and grounding. Her breath hitched, and when she looked up, her eyes held a challenge, a dare. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers, her skin soft and electric. She didn't pull away. "Let's start slow," she said, her voice low, a smile tugging at her lips. "No gala drama, no rain-soaked mistakes. Just us deal," he said, grinning, his thumb tracing her knuckles. The touch sent a spark through him, and he wanted to pull her closer to kiss her right there, but he held back, respecting her pace. They left the Institute, walking into Jamaica Plain's evening glow. The neighborhood was alive with color murals on brick walls, cafes spilling light onto the sidewalk, the air buzzing with laughter and acoustic guitar from a nearby bar. They stopped at a cozy coffee shop, its windows fogged with warmth, and sat at a corner table, sharing a plate of maple scones and black coffee. The conversation flowed like it always had, her teasing him about his terrible taste in scones, him asking about her new research. both of them laughing over memories of Chicago's soul food and Atlanta's tapas. But there was something new, a quiet intimacy, like they were finally on the same page. As the night deepened, they walked through the Arnold Arboretum, its paths lined with glowing lanterns for a fall festival. The air was cool, the scent of pine and leaves wrapping around them. Elijah took her hand, her fingers lacing with his, and the simple act felt monumental, like a promise. They stopped under a towering maple, its leaves a canopy of red and gold, the lanterns casting a soft amber light across her face. "You're different," she said, looking up at him, her voice soft. "Not just the flannel. You're lighter. You make me want to be," he said, his free hand brushing a curl from her cheek. Her skin was warm, her eyes searching his, and the world shrank to just them. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the festival, the heat of her breath in the cool air. He leaned in slow, giving her time to pull back, but she didn't. Their lips met, gentle at first. A question answered. Then she deepened it, her hand sliding to his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her close. The kiss was fire and home, her lips soft and sure, the taste of coffee and maple lingering. His fingers grazed the small of her back, feeling the warmth of her through her sweater, and her breath caught a soft sound that sent his pulse racing. The lanterns flickered their light, dancing across her skin, and the moment stretched perfect and unbroken. When they parted, her forehead rested against his, her breath warm on his lips. "Slow, huh?" she teased, her voice husky. "Slow as you want," he said, grinning, though his heart was anything but calm. They walked back to her apartment, hands still linked the night, wrapping them in its quiet magic. At her door, she paused, her eyes bright. "This doesn't mean you're off the hook," she said. "You've got work to do. Grant. Wouldn't have it any other way," he said, kissing her knuckles before letting her go. Inside his hotel room later, Elijah felt lighter, like he'd shed a skin he'd outgrown. His phone buzzed with a message from Talia. "Heard you're in Boston. Don't screw this up, boss," he laughed. Then saw another message, this one from Malik Turner, Jasmine's friend. "She's happy. Don't mess that up, man." Elijah typed a quick, "I won't," and meant it. Even Camille Dubois had reached out an email, surprising in its sincerity. "I was wrong to interfere. Be good to her." He didn't reply, but the gesture felt like closure. The next morning, he met Jasmine for breakfast at a Jamaica Plain diner, where they shared pancakes and traded stories about their worst college dates. She laughed, her eyes crinkling, and Elijah knew this was just the beginning. They planned a weekend trip to Vermont to see the fall leaves and eat maple candy. No assistants, no paparazzi. Just them. For the first time, Elijah felt like he was building something real. Not a deal or a headline, but a life. Jasmine wasn't just his future. She was his present, and he'd fight like hell to keep her there. The Asheville evening glowed soft and golden, the Blue Ridge Mountains cradling the horizon like a promise. Kept Elijah Grant stood in a garden in Biltmore Village, his heart pounding under a simple linen suit, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and warm earth. A year had passed since he'd stood outside Jasmine Nkrumah's office in Boston, daisies in hand, begging for a chance. Now, here they were about to say vows in a place that felt like home, not because of its price tag, but because it was theirs. The garden was small, strung with fairy lights and wildflowers, a far cry from the society wedding he'd once planned with Sophia Winters. This was real messy, perfect, and every second of it was for them. The crowd was intimate family, a few friends, no paparazzi. A local blues band played low, the guitarist's fingers coaxing out a soulful melody that wove through the chatter. Tables were piled with soul food and Ghanaian dishes, mac and cheese, fried chicken, jollof rice, kelewel, honoring Jasmine's Chicago roots and her family's heritage. Elijah's eyes kept drifting to the arch, where she'd soon appear, his nerves buzzing like the cicadas in the trees. Talia Brooks, his former assistant, turned best friend, clapped him on the shoulder, her braids swinging. "You're sweating, man," she teased, adjusting his boutonniere. "Thought billionaires didn't get nervous." "Ex-billionaire," he corrected, grinning. He'd funneled most of his wealth into medical research foundations, keeping just enough for a modest life. "And I'm marrying Jasmine Hell. Yeah, I'm nervous." "She's worth it," Talia said, her voice softening. "You both are." The music shifted, a gentle strum signaling the start. Elijah's breath caught as Jasmine stepped into view, and the world slowed. Her gown was a masterpiece, cream silk with gold embroidery inspired by Ghanaian kente cloth, hugging her curves before flowing into a soft train. Her curls were swept up, adorned with tiny white flowers, and her smile, bright and unguarded, hit him like sunlight. Nkrumah walked beside her, radiant in a vibrant Ankara dress, her eyes shining with pride. The crowd faded, and for Elijah, it was just Jasmine walking toward him, like she'd always been his destination. They met under the arch, her hand slipping into his, her skin warm and steady. "You clean up nice, Grant?" she whispered, her Chicago accent wrapping around the words like a hug. "You're stealing my line," he murmured, his thumb brushing her knuckles. The officiant began, but Elijah barely heard, lost in her eyes in the way the fairy lights danced across her face. They'd written their own vows, and when it was his turn, he took a shaky breath. "Jasmine, you saw me when I was just a suit, a name on a building," he said, voice low but clear. "You challenged me to be more, to be real. I promised to love you fiercely, to fight for us, to laugh with you over burnt cornbread and dance with you under every star. You're my home, and I'm yours always." Her eyes glistened, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, full of fire. "Elijah, you chose yourself and then you chose us. I promise to push you, to hold you, to remind you who you are when you forget I love you, not for what you were, but for who you are right here, right now." They slipped rings onto each other's fingers, simple gold bands, no diamonds, and when the officiant said, "You may kiss," Elijah pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that was joy and promise, her breath warm, her taste familiar. The crowd cheered, but he only heard her soft laugh against his mouth, felt her hands on his face, grounding him. The reception was a blur of music and love. The blues band kicked into a lively set, and guests spilled onto the dance floor, swaying under the lights. Loretta shared stories of Jasmine's childhood, her voice carrying over the crowd, while Trey, Jasmine's cousin, challenged Elijah to a dance-off, much to everyone's amusement. Malik Turner, Jasmine's old friend, approached during a quiet moment, his surgical scrubs traded for a sharp suit. "You did good, man," Malik said, shaking Elijah's hand. "She's happy. That's all I ever wanted. Thanks for not punching me in Atlanta," Elijah said, half grinning. Malik chuckled. "Tempted, but she's worth more than my ego." Even Camille Dubois sent a gift, a donation to Jasmine's Research Institute, with a note. "I was wrong. Wishing you both the best." Sophia Winters, now engaged to a quiet art dealer in San Francisco, sent a bouquet of lilies with a simple card. "Be happy." Elijah's father, David, was there too, stiff but present, his handshake, a silent truce. His mother, softer now, hugged Jasmine tightly, whispering, "Thank you for bringing him back." As the night deepened, Elijah and Jasmine stole away to a quiet corner of the garden. The music a distant hum. They swayed together, no formal steps, just their bodies close under the stars. Her gown brushed his legs, her warmth seeping through his shirt, and he pressed his lips to her forehead, breathing her in jasmine silk. Home. You could have had a big-shot wedding. She teased, her voice low, her hands resting on his chest. Hell yeah. And I'd trade it all for this, he said, his fingers tracing the curve of her back, feeling the silk slide under his touch. You. This garden, that cornbread done deal. She laughed, the sound vibrating against him, and tilted her face up, her eyes catching the moonlight. He kissed her, slow and deep, their lips moving like they had all the time in the world. Her hands slid into his hair, tugging gently, and a soft moan escaped her, sending heat through him. The night air was cool, but her body was fire, her breath hot against his mouth, the taste of honey and spice from the Kellowell lingering. His hands settled on her hips, pulling her closer, and the world shrank to just them. The rustle of leaves, the faint blues ripped the pulse of their hearts. It was intimate, electric, but they pulled back, foreheads touching both, knowing tonight was just the start. They rejoined the party, dancing until their feet ached, laughing until their sides hurt. Later in their honeymoon suite, a cozy cabin overlooking the mountains, they stood on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. The stars bright above Elijah held her from behind his chin on her shoulder, her curls tickling his cheek. This is it, isn't it? He murmured. The real stuff. Damn right, she said, turning to kiss him, her lips soft and sure. Their life now was nothing like his old one. They'd settled in Asheville in a craftsman house in Biltmore Village, filled with books, records, and a kitchen where they burned half their meals. Laughing, Elijah consulted for non-profits, using his tech expertise to get medical innovations to underserved communities. Jasmine's research was breaking ground, her latest paper making waves in journals. They spent weekends hiking the Blue Ridge trails, cooking Ghanaian stews with Loretta's recipes, and dancing to soul records in their living room. Every night Elijah fell asleep with Jasmine in his arms, her warmth, his anchor, her love, his truth. The headlines had faded, the world moving on to new scandals. His father called sometimes, their talks less strained. Talia visited often, her new promotion at Grant Technologies, a point of pride. Malik sent updates from his surgical residency, always with a joke about Elijah's dancing. Even Sophia's occasional emails were kind, her life blooming in a way it never could have with him. As the Asheville stars twinkled, Elijah realized he'd never been richer than in this moment. No billions, no penthouse, just a woman who saw him a life that fit. Jasmine turned in his arms, her smile the same one that had caught him at that Seattle gala, and he knew this was forever, and he'd choose it every time. Love doesn't always come with a plan. Sometimes it crashes in messy and true, and asks you to be brave. Elijah and Jasmine chose their truth. Have you ever had to choose yours? Drop a comment with your story and hit subscribe to catch more tales of love that change everything.